a world where we have everything and it's still not enough, we're often left wondering, is this really it?
Deep inside, you know there's more to life. You're ready to leave behind the old push your way through and claim the deeper, more meaningful life that's calling you.
That's what we invite you to explore with us.
We're your hosts,
Stephanie Allen
and Maren and Stephanie. And this is the Soulful Leader Podcast.
Yay! Hi, welcome to the Soulful Leader Podcast. This is Stephanie, and I'm here with Maren. And we're literally having a conversation about conversations. And I think as leaders, this is so empowering to be able to really speak well and what's in your heart, what's in your mind, your goals, your dreams, but also to listen well. And it's been interesting to me because when you start to listen, sometimes people can just ramble about nothing for hours. And I sometimes wonder why. Like, are they wanting to be heard? And maybe what they're saying, there's something else going on underneath that surface. Maybe they're avoiding a feeling, or they don't quite know how to drop in deep enough to get what the sustenance of what they really need to say could be. But there's an interesting thing of when I listen to someone, are they moving towards something, or are they trying to get away from something?
So something comes up for me as you're saying that. I know people, including you, who are verbal processors. Mm-hmm. Like literally, I am more of a kinesthetic processor. So I'll hear something and I need to process it through my body, which means sometimes I'm writing, sometimes I'm moving, sometimes I have to go work out, I have to go walk for in nature. Whereas there are other people who are verbal processors and they literally need to hear it come out of their mouth in order to make sense of it. And I know for myself, when I'm listening to a verbal processor, I can't hold them to what they're saying, right? Because for me, I process through what I want to say and then a fairly close version of the final version kind of comes out. Whereas with a verbal processor, you're going to hear the entire mess of stuff mm-hmm. before they can get to oh, that's what I wanted to say. So I think that as leaders, as humans, we need to be aware of, is somebody verbally processing? Or are they having verbal diarrhea? Or are they running from something? Are they moving towards something that they want our input? Are bringing our own awareness to the conversation of what's happening behind the conversation. What's the motivation?
What are they not saying too?
Yeah.
That needs
what's
to
the
be
motivation
said
for them to be in the conversation?
Mm-hmm.
What are they getting out of it? What are you getting out of it? There's so much. It's amazing.
Yeah. I also listen to someone's language too, of that black and white thinking, right, wrong, good, bad, that polarity of thinking. And that's kind of what I mean by the running away from. Usually people who are running away from something, it's very negative. It's black and white thinking. It's either this or it's that. There is no space for the integration of both.
I also noticed that if somebody is running away from something, that negativity, it does come up. So recently I had an infection in my body, and I am not an antibiotics person. That will be my course of very last resort. So I very diligently took care of it, and it was fine till about 2 weeks later when it wasn't. And then I was really diligent about, taking care of it. And then it was fine until a week later it wasn't. And I was going through this pattern. And what I noticed for myself, and this comes back around to the negativity and the moving away from, is that having the infection gave me an opportunity to complain, to be in poor me, to be negative. It also gave me the motivation to move away from the pain and the suffering and all of the drama that I was able to create in my own life with this infection. And when I think about like the towards and away that you were just talking about, of if this is one of my realizations as my pattern became more obvious to myself, is I have the opportunity to move towards better health, better thinking, whatever the towards is that would keep the infection at bay. And if I look at this for a metaphor, as a metaphor for my life, right? And I'm not just talking about the infection at this point. I'm talking about like the way I live my life. I want to become more of a towards person. I'm very motivated as an away person. When things get painful, I get into full gear and I know how to make things happen.
I think that's true of a lot.
It's like, can anyone else relate to that?
This is really uncomfortable. How fast can I get away from it?
Yeah. And how many of us, including us and our teams, are motivated by last minute deadlines or the drama of, a complaint by a customer, or, like whatever we have to do something about it now thing is. Versus
the urgency.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the other piece, which is, what's the vision? What are we moving towards? And if we can hold that and have consistent action towards it, what I've found for myself is when I can actually do that, there is so much less drama, so much less infection, so much less like, I have to find a different way to get the chemical cocktail download in my system, the adrenaline rush, because I'm actually being consistent and things are happening and my world is changing. And you know what? I would much prefer that.
And you mentioned earlier too about being kinesthetic processor. I think a lot of times when I would call this shadowy, like what I mean by shadow, it's like, I don't want to look at that because it's bad or it's negative or it's wrong or it's uncomfortable, and we push it away. And if we're kinesthetic, it doesn't go away. It actually gets pushed within us. And then it comes out and it manifests as an illness or an injury or some sort of physical chemical cocktail of a high. And there's another way of doing that. Like sometimes it's like, well, what would it feel like to actually move towards something that's ideal? It's going to feel uncomfortable too, but it's moving towards an ideal, rather than feeling the uncomfortability of what you're trying to move away from. And that's, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like in that way of, we have to feel. Like we all need to feel. And I think we try to stay up in our heads and think about things.
Yeah.
Instead of dropping in and going, is this feeling coming from a toward? And that's why it's uncomfortable because I haven't been there before. Or is it coming from an away that is familiar, and we can actually become addicted to it and keep perpetuating that addiction again and again. So we leave one bad relationship and we attract another one that looks different on the outside, but internally it's still creating those same sort of chemicals.
There's a great TED Talk where Sir Robinson, what's his first name? Do you remember his first name?
No, Ken.
Sir Ken Robinson. And he talks about how, as a society, we have become more and more just like, we live from the head up. We're cerebral beings. And the interesting thing is that we have the same cells in our brain. We have some of those same cells in both our heart and in our gut. And the three are meant to be connected, and we've completely disconnected from them. And so this may be part of the reason that, your question at the beginning of when we're in conversation and somebody is just rambling and rambling and it's like, because we're so disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
We're up in our heads trying to figure everything out. And we are physical, spiritual beings. We're not just cerebral beings. And so we're meant to be all of it. And when we can connect those, there's more meaning. And when there's more meaning, I think there's less rambling. That's just a guess on my part.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you can start to feel and see and hear simultaneously integrated, that's when you have the full spectrum of the conversation.
Well, and that's the word human being. Hue is the full, think of colors, right? Color hues. That's the full spectrum. We are meant to be full spectrum beings. Hue.
Yeah, we're not flat.
And beings, right. Yeah. And yet at this point in our evolution, we're being very flat. We're cerebral.
A question to you then. So you're talking to somebody who's rambling for hours sometimes. As a leader, what is your process to help understand what they're really trying to communicate or what you really need to hear? How do you work with that?
So I think it's twofold. First is that I need to develop the skill of listening to what's happening behind what's being said. And that's a definite skill, because we're used to listening to somebody's words and responding to their words, instead of listening to what's really being said behind their words. And a lot of times you can go to metaphor to understand that better.
So tell me more about that. Like, what does that mean, go to metaphor?
So metaphor, there's a really interesting book called Metaphors We Live By. And it talks about the fact that metaphors, we think of them as a language thing, right? It's just how we use words. We relate this thing to that thing. So there was a book by Irma Bombeck called Life is a Bowl of Cherries. So why am I always in the pits or something like that, right? So that's a metaphor. Life is a bowl of cherries. And then she took it to the next dictionary, but she lives in the pits, right? The argument from the people in this book, the metaphors we live by, is that they're not just words. We didn't just pick that association out of nowhere. And I think that's the Irma Bombeck book is a great example of that. She felt like she lived in the pits. And now we have this image in our minds of what her life is like, right? Everybody can picture that. And she said it in a very succinct way. So that's what metaphors do, is they compare this to that, and we see it in a very succinct way. One of the examples that they give in the book is, well, in talking about the fact that it's not just language. Our metaphors tell us how we think.
Meaning, right? like where we are in awareness and what we're focused on, kind of thing. Is that what you mean? How we think?
So, I mean, if you look at the Irma Bombeck book, right? She thinks that life is a bowl of cherries, but she gets the pits. She like her life sucks. And we can clearly see that's not just language. It's not a choice out of the middle of nowhere. And in the book, they use argument as war. And as a culture, we do tend to think of argument as war. And I think a lot of people would be like, oh, I don't think so. And yet when we look at our language around argument, one of the things that we do is when we talk about arguments, some of the things we might say is like, he attacked every weak point in my argument. So you're using war words, attacking
yeah.
weak points, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or his criticism
and viewing
right
that person as an enemy.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or I demolished his argument.
Yeah, the win-loss.
The win-loss. And this goes to what you were talking about of like the either or, like I'm right or they're right. So there is no, when we realize that somebody is talking in those terms, we have a sense of what's going on behind. So this takes it back to, right? Listening to what's being said behind somebody's words is, it's not just what they're talking about. It's the larger concept behind what they're talking about. What's the belief system? Because when somebody's going on and on and on and on and on and on and on, I need to understand that before I can actually I can either enter the conversation with them at the level that they're having it, which means that now I'm probably going to be in an argument with them. Or I can start to become aware of what's really going on behind that. You know who does this really well is good counselors.
Yeah.
Yeah. They can listen and then like they'll do one little zinger, they'll listen to a full hour and then they'll come back with one little thing of like, oh, that was the crux of it, wasn't it?
I when I'm listening to someone, I like to be present to what is the question I need to ask them. Or, what is this conversation? What is it leading towards as a question I can ask? I don't know if I'm saying that right, but do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And I'm going to bring up something that you mentioned, I think it was a couple podcasts ago, where when you listen to somebody, you actually put yourself in their shoes. You actually start to like
empathize or like I literally see, hear, feel from their perspective. Right. And then that helps me ask a question. Like what would it, like that? That's the question I ask myself. Like, what would it feel like, or see like, or sound like from that person's perspective, and where would be something more loving, something more beautiful, toward, I would say. And if I was to move them towards an ideal, I don't know what that ideal is, but if I was to move them towards something that is more beautiful, instead of looking at what they're trying to push away. Like when you think of pushing and pulling, I think of moving away from something is a motivation. It's like, you want to like push it away, get away from me. But if you take that energy and you push, you're using your personal energy, your personal life force to push away something. And then you are tired, you're exhausted, you need to replenish yourself versus being pulled towards something. I always find when you have an ideal or a dream or a desire or a longing, and sometimes we don't know what that is that is what pulls us. It lifts us up. It lightens us up. So when someone is talking, I often will say, how can I change that direction? Instead of a push away, more of a pull up.
And I think that gets to the second half of the question that you asked before is, as a leader, how do we change the energy of like a diatribe, I guess, of that ongoing monologue, right? And once you're aware of the energy behind it, I love that, because that's a great way to shift it of, okay, usually it's some sort of a one-sided something, and how do we shift it to a towards, so that it could potentially be both of us are moving towards something instead of I'm having to be on this side and that person's on that side.
Yeah, this, you and me, it's like against everything, instead of like a community coming together and working towards the same ideal. Or something even more beautiful coming together that we didn't even see individually. I think there's so many possibilities. I think we get stuck in a prison of our own mind, thinking, it's doom and gloom, instead of opening it up, saying, hey, this is where I'm stuck. I'm feeling focused on, I need to get out of this situation, or I'm uncomfortable, I'm in pain, and I'm stuck here. Can you help me see a different version of it? Like, And that's where the question can come in. Well, what would you want different? Like, if it's not this, what do you want instead? And then when people come together with ideals and positive, it literally, like you said, integrating means to make whole, but it also means to include both and go to a totally new level.
Yeah. So we're kind of mixing things here.
Yeah.
One side of it was that we're talking from a leadership perspective as a leader, how can I, maybe diffuse something, an ongoing monologue?
Yeah.
And then I think the other piece of that is when it happens in ourselves, like I was talking about for myself, of how do we find the towards piece so that we don't get stuck in that away, which is really easy to get stuck in because we do get some sort of a reward system from our bodies about it and all kinds of things. So is there a particular way that you as a leader, as a human, as a being on the planet, that you are able to either get yourself out of it or know when to ask for help when you're in that?
Well, I had a situation just actually this last weekend. A little while ago, I was leading a group. And I had a very challenging, out of the 20 people, I had challenging 5 women that were just really, really hard on me. And hard to be with the other 15 women also found it hard. And I was like, okay, this is an us and them kind of situation. And I talked to, my company afterwards because we did reports, and my company had talked to me and they said, hey, look, you're not in trouble. I just want to understand the big picture of what happened, what went down. And we had a really great talk and understood it. And that night I couldn't go to sleep. I literally had an anxiety attack, and I was like, man, I can't even breathe. I can't find my rhythm of my own breath, doing my practices. So I literally, I think I got up very right then and there. And I just wrote an email over to my supervisor that I was working with. And I said, it really stirred something up in me. Can we talk about this? I need to find another version of this so I can make peace and be at peace in my heart, but also just totally be restored from this. I wasn't even just at peace. I want to be restored, and I really want to learn, and I want to grow, and I want to evolve so that the next time, because there always will be another time that this would happen, I want to handle it different. And we had a lovely conversation, like literally a couple of days later, and talked it all out. And she's like, hey, this is really great. I'm glad you reached out. And I said, yeah. I said, what one piece of advice would you give me? She's like, next time when it's happening, keep us in the loop, like right away. I said, oh, that would have been wise. I said, I kind of felt like a little bit of a tattletale, like kind of over dramatizing, saying, oh, I'm calling and tattletaling on all this kind of stuff. And I also noticed that within myself, I didn't even know that it was as bad as it was until the end. And so it gave me an insight of going, even when something is feeling off, or it is like, there's nothing wrong with just literally picking up the phone or sending an email or reaching out and saying, hey, I need another perspective. Can you help me? Because otherwise I'm going to spend all my energy pushing away.
Yeah.
It costs a lot of energy.
And you're in survival mode at that point.
And then reacting constantly.
And I think, our culture, we tend towards the adrenaline junkie, where survival mode is what we love because it wakes us up. It gets us, we feel something, like you were saying earlier. Yeah. And it
feel alive.
That's one of the few things that will drop us into our bodies. So finding alternatives to that is really powerful. And I do want to point out two things that you said. The first was that you said, I want to find a different version of this. And I think so often we know that there's 2 sides to a story. We don't know that there's probably 200 sides to a story. And that it's never just our side and their side. Because what if I made my side of the story different? And that leads me to the second thing you said, because you said that you restored yourself. And I want to point out, the words there of you restoried. So you told a different story and it restored you.
Totally.
There's no accident that those words are related.
And if I could have done it on my own, I would have much faster, but it wasn't working. And I've been really holding a boundary, talking about boundaries here again, but holding an internal boundary with myself. Like when I'm agitated, when I'm catastrophizing, when the narrative inside myself is just really critical and negative, whether it's towards myself or something else or someone else, I know I need to ask for help because I'm in it. I'm in the pit.
And when we're in it, we can't see it.
That's right. So really training myself that asking for help and reaching out is a toward, it's like you're reaching your hand up and saying, can you lift me up and out? Can you pull me out of this so that I can be restored and have a new story?
So that I can tell a different story. Yeah. Exactly. I love that. So that's going to be my assignment for everyone this week is there someplace in your life that you could tell a different story and restore something, maybe something that's really special for you.
And to reach out and be pulled up and have someone else maybe give you a higher and more beautiful version of the story.
Yeah.
Because when you're in it, you can't always see the full spectrum of what is there.
And just, that is something that Stephanie and I do on a regular basis. That's part of our jobs. So if you want to reach out to us, feel free. We would love to hear from you. And you can do that on our Facebook page or our LinkedIn page. Those are at the Soulful Leaders. You can do that on our website. We've got our business website, which is tslp.life. And then we've got the soulfulleaderpodcast.com. You can find us in lots of places.
And please do.
And please do. We would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you all next week on the Soulful Leader Podcast.
And that wraps up another episode of the Soulful Leader Podcast with your hosts, Stephanie Allen
and Maren Oslack. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to dive deeper, head over to our website at thesoulfulleaderpodcast.com.
Until next time.